Sometimes when we're struggling with depression, we become obsessed with looking for a way out of our own lives. And this way out could look a lot of different ways. It often involves a really heavy investment into fantasy worlds. People get really into storylines or world building or characters or fandom of things like video games, novels, anime, manga, TV shows, movies. And it goes beyond the level of just being really interested or really invested in these characters and into like, I wish I were them or I wish I existed there rather than here. Sometimes it's more about people who actually do exist in the world, and we become almost obsessed with having certain relationships. Like if I was just dating this person or was friends with this person, or maybe even if this person like mentored me or taught me what they know, things would be better. Sometimes, of course, we become very, very invested in escaping our own lives through death, and that can turn into suicidal ideation, whether passive or active. But this way, this pattern, I should say, of constantly looking for an escape from being ourselves and living our own lives is one of 8 oddly specific symptoms of depression that I'm going to review with you today. These are not official diagnostic DSM-5 recognized symptoms of a depressive episode. These are things I've noticed either in my own life with my own battles or anecdotally among the people I work with professionally, or in many cases, both. And the second oddly specific symptom of depression is a tiredness that no amount of sleep or caffeine seems to be able to make a dent in. I have described this previously as a tiredness that you feel more in your soul than in your body. It's different than the tiredness you feel when you just didn't get a great night's sleep. It's like there's a magnet in the ground that's just constantly draining everything out of you. And no matter what you do, you can't seem to get past this very, very low baseline level of energy and motivation. It doesn't matter how much sleep you get. You can have 3, 4, 5 caffeinated beverages and you still don't really feel with it. You still feel slow and foggy and sluggish. In fact, when you do consume a lot of caffeine, when you're experiencing this type of tiredness, it actually ends up feeling terrible because what happens, it's like a special kind of torture, is you physically kind of get the energy, but there's no motivation or no drive, and your brain still feels slow. So you end up almost feeling like your body and your brain are not in sync with one another. And it's like you have energy, but there's absolutely nothing you can do with it. And it just kind of circulates inside of you purposely and pointlessly. And so you get this like restless, agitated, kind of want to rip my own skin off feeling, but also like, but I'm also super tired and can't do anything. It's really miserable. So if you do seem to be experiencing that type of tiredness, definitely don't overuse caffeine trying to fix it because not only will it not work, it'll just make you hate your life. The third, and this one, if you haven't experienced it, this one in particular, probably going to sound really weird. But the third is muted colors, meaning just the world doesn't physically look as vibrant to you as it used to or as it actually is. The weird thing about this one is you would think it would be super noticeable, right? Like if your perception of the color of the world changes. But I've experienced this and I've heard other people describe it too, so I know it's not just me. Things get really gray or brown when you're depressed sometimes. And it's not it's not like you've suddenly gone colorblind. It's hard to explain, but it's more subtle than you would think. And it can really slip under your radar and go unnoticed, but it is a very, very real thing that happens. And I first noticed it so the city I live in now, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, I've lived here twice. And the first time I lived here, I struggled with pretty severe depression for like probably more than half the time I was here. When we moved back, my wife and I remember remarking to her, I'm like, when did this city get so green? Like, we were just driving down the highway and I remember looking around and there's like a river and there's trees. And I'm like, man, they really fixed this place up since we've been here. They must have been working hard on like rebuilding the natural environment and stuff like that. She just looked at me like I was crazy. And she goes, "This is what it's always looked like. It's literally the same. It looked so different to me than I remember it looking. I remember it being just so beige and like foggy looking. And I realize now that was me. That wasn't the actual city. That was my perception of the world influenced by my emotional state. And I've heard other people describe this too, so I know it's a real thing. Depression can absolutely cause you to perceive muted colors in the actual physical world. The fourth is something that I call angry perfectionism. And this is it's an intense rigidity and a very, very strong sense of like, here's the way things should be. And that part in and of itself might sound similar to the perfectionism that goes along with anxiety. But when you're anxious and perfectionistic, it's like it makes you unsettled or nervous or just uncomfortable when things aren't right. When you're depressed and things aren't right, it just makes you pissed off. And it's different. It's like it can almost create rage inside of you for things to not be what your mind in that moment perceives to be the correct way. And this rage can really disrupt your relationships because people might start to regard you as being like ridiculous or unreasonable or just grumpy all the time. And like I know that I was, and I was probably absolutely miserable to be around. But somewhere in my brain, I felt like if things were just right, like if all this stuff and the stuff changed a lot, whether it's like people, school, my job, where I live, whatever, like if all this stuff could just not be so complicated and dysfunctional and ambiguous, like if this just worked right, I wouldn't hate this so much. Why can we not just do that? And I really, unfortunately, took that frustration out on a lot of people around me, especially family and those close to me. And I was just so mad all the time because I felt like things were supposed to be different than they actually were. I became so hypercritical and so perfectionistic, but also felt so unable to actually enact any of the ideas I had for how I felt things should be that the only way it came out was anger. And this too, I have since learned is not just some weird me thing. A lot of people with depression experience this, and I think it's kind of an overlap of anhedonia, which is difficulty or inability to feel joy or other pleasant, positive emotions. I said pleasantive. I decided to combine those two words. Combined with what's called psychomotor agitation, which is sort of this like an increase in energy, but it's not like a euphoric manic type increase in energy. It's like restless, pointless energy. And it just drives you nuts, and it makes you feel like like your skin is crawling and you get itchy, and it's just terrible. The fifth oddly specific symptom of depression I want to cover with you today is what I call achievement anesthesia. So, if you've ever had a procedure done, a medical procedure, where they used a local anesthetic, you know it's kind of a weird feeling because you're awake and alert when you just have a local anesthetic. So you understand what's going on. And sometimes you hear things or like you hear people talking or whatever. So you're fully alert and you can perceive what's happening around you. And you know something like pretty significant is happening, but you can't feel any of it. Achievement anesthesia is like that, but for your accomplishments or for your obviously achievements. And so when we're experiencing what I call achievement anesthesia, it's like you can still go out and do cool things. Maybe you get promotion at work or a really good grade on a test, or like your kids say thank you, I love you, whatever. You can do all these great things and you can logically be aware of the fact that it should make you feel some certain way, but the emotion just doesn't hit. It's like someone has applied a local anesthetic to your heart. And it's like full disclosure, this happens to me sometimes with reading comments on social media because you guys, and I hope this doesn't sound like ungrateful, but you guys leave me some amazing comments, and I'll read through them. And sometimes when I'm in this state, I'll read a comment where someone's like, "This is the best video I've ever watched," or like, you put words to feelings that I couldn't put words to and that no one else has. And in my brain, I'm like, man, that's so cool. And then it's just like, I don't feel what I think I'm supposed to feel when that, because that's an absolutely amazing thing to read. and it should feel incredible, and sometimes it does. In fact, often it does these days, but sometimes I'm just not in an emotional state where my brain allows that to happen. And if you've had that happen with any major achievement or accomplishment in your life, you know how simultaneously weird and frustrating it is when you feel that way. Because you know you have these things in your life that should be producing this emotion, that should be creating this like pride, maybe not even pride, but just like some sort of positive emotion, and it's just numb. And you know it should be there and it isn't, and it's incredibly frustrating. And sometimes what we do when we experience this achievement anesthesia is we don't realize that it might be part of our depression or part of our anhedonia. And sometimes we think like, oh, that means I just didn't do enough. So since I didn't feel what I thought I would feel from this thing, I need to get to that next level and keep pushing yourself farther and farther and farther. And I'm not necessarily saying you shouldn't do that. It's good for us to have goals, work towards goals, have upward trajectories. These are all good things. But if you do it thinking that, it's because you did something wrong or you didn't do enough, it might just be that your brain wasn't in a state of functioning where it was going to allow you to feel no matter what you did. Now, this is just speculation, right? So I don't like to talk about people I've never met, but when I hear about really famous, like beloved people, like dying by suicide or overdoses or things like that. People who most of us would look at them and be like, I would give almost anything to have that life and to have that talent and that skill set and be admired by that many people. And you see that it clearly didn't make them feel, at least for some period of time, the way you would think you would feel if you were able to live their life. And my assumption, my baseless assumption, not knowing, I've never met Anthony Bourdain, Chester Bennington, Chris Cornell, except like, I'm not going to act like I know their life. But when I see what happens to people like that, this is kind of what I tend to assume is that maybe they felt this or didn't feel it, I guess might be a better way to say, because it looks like they had all the things that should have made them feel good, but clearly it wasn't enough. And this one can be really frustrating because it can be perceived as being ungrateful. Like that's why I kind of gave a disclaimer when I was using myself as an example here. I don't want you guys to ever think that this is me being like, oh, I don't care what they say. Their feedback doesn't matter to me. Like, it's not that. I love that stuff. It's just that sometimes it can't break through, and that's just a thing that happens to us sometimes. And it's if that happens to you, it's not necessarily something you're doing wrong or not doing enough of. It's just your brain. Your brain just doesn't cooperate sometimes. And it's so frustrating. I know, but it's not just you. I mean, if what I've described sounds like you, it's not just you. Me and probably a lot of other people from the sounds of things. The sixth oddly specific symptom of depression that is not in the DSM, but that is extremely common is, for lack of a better phrasing, normal people look like superheroes. When I say normal people, like I know it's kind of a loaded word because who or what is normal, right? I mean, people who just get up and function consistently, like people who hold a job and have a family and have a home and like just generally do, not perfectly, obviously, but generally just do the things that we're supposed to be doing. Sometimes when you're in a very depressed state, a period of depression that's really debilitating you or negatively affecting your functioning, and you just look outside, there's a busy street right outside my window. So there's a lot of cars going by. And I remember a time when I would just look out a window and look at cars. And I couldn't even see the people driving in. I'd just be like, wow, they're doing things. Like they have places to go and they're going there. And that's like, I just couldn't imagine being able to consistently do that. I was like, every now and then, like, first of all, I don't usually have a place to go because nothing's happening in my life. And when I do have a place I'm supposed to be, half the time I can't make myself go there. And you look at people who do normal things that, the things that we kind of take for granted. And it's like, you're like Batman. Like, how do you do that? Because I can't make myself do that consistently, even when I have the opportunity to do that consistently. And you just kind of feel like you're the bottom layer of humanity, and everyone else, even just like statistically average people, it's like they look so far beyond where you're at that it feels like you've been separated from the entire world, or at least from society. And maybe that, I didn't even think about that until I was talking about it, but maybe that's what creates the seventh symptom of depression that is not recognized by the American Psychological Association, which is a chronic sense of displacement. So we've talked about this before in other videos, and there's a lot of different definitions of things that might kind of sound like this. But what I mean by a chronic sense of displacement is a sense that in some way, shape, or form, the life you were put into is the wrong one and it just doesn't work for you. I've seen this show up as like people thinking they should have been born into a different family, into a different country, sometimes into a different timeline. But just a sense of like where I'm at and who I am like something got messed up here. There's been an error in like the distribution process of souls or something like, and I didn't end up where I was supposed to be. Um, and again, this is just sometimes this might be a conscious thought, sometimes it might just be like a feeling or a sensation you have. And with it, there's often this longing for a place or a people or a time that feels like home to you. And you might not even know what that is. It might be specific, it might be non-specific. Like I had a friend, this seems to be a common one. I had a friend like in high school who was convinced that like basically they were supposed to be Japanese. And that might sound really goofy, but I mean, they knew an immense amount about Japanese culture. And when they explained it to me, I was like, that does sound like you. Like you sound like you're Japanese and not American. Like no wonder you don't really feel like you fit in here. Um, it's just this really intense longing for this life you feel like you were supposed to have that ended up not being the one that at least up to this point in your life you've been able to find or create. Um, And I think to bring this full circle, maybe purely theoretical, maybe that relates to this sense of like being ostracized from society because I can't do the things I'm supposed to be able to do. So maybe these are actually two versions of the same symptom, but I'm not going to go too far into that because I'm just going to end up rambling, and that's not what you guys are here for. So the last symptom I want to cover, the eighth oddly specific symptom of depression, is that you can start to develop an addiction to anything that creates emotion. Doesn't even always have to be pleasant emotion. Because when you're in that anhedonic state, and you're really depressed and you, generally speaking, can't feel a thing, as soon as you find something that breaks through, and that could be a hobby, it could be a person, it could be a substance, it could be food, it could be not eating. When you find something that makes you feel, and you haven't felt for a long time, it's like, this is the only thing I want to do. Because everything in my life except for this now feels worthless, pointless, and stupid. So I want to center my life around this thing because it's the only thing that gets through to me when I'm in this state. And that can be something that already has physiologically addictive properties anyway. Again, drugs, alcohol, even self-harm actually can have physiologically addictive properties. Food obviously can. But it can be something, a lot of people get confused, like, how can you be addicted to something that's not addictive? There's chemically addictive and there's behaviorally addictive. And if something makes you feel dramatically better in the moment than anything else you've found in this entire world, it does kind of make sense that that's all you'd want to do. Now, it can destroy your life to actually indulge those impulses, of course. I'm not suggesting we should. I am suggesting that the impulse is understandable. And again, I know this as someone who's been addicted to something that has no chemically addictive properties, which is video games. For a long time, my entire life was centered around when, what, and how video games. Like, what am I going to play, when, for how long? Basically, everything else I did in life, work, school, taking care of my home, social obligations, was just like stuff I had to get through to get to the thing I really wanted to do, which was gaming, because it felt 10 times more rewarding or stimulating than anything else in my life. And so that was what my life focused on. And I realize now, I think the reason, I mean, part of it is just like my brain is just wired to be very stimulated by gaming. But I also realize now part of it was my enjoyment of everything else in life was dulled by my depression. And for whatever reason, we've talked about like partial anhedonia and sometimes certain things still work even when you're depressed. For whatever reason, other than a few days here and there when I was at my absolute rock bottom, depression didn't touch gaming for me. And so like it was good and bad. On one, we talked about survival resources as possibly being things that may have saved your life. If I hadn't found gaming, I don't know if I would have made it through that period of my life because it was the only thing I cared about. Without it, I might have just not cared about anything. And I don't think that would have gone well. But it did become something as I started to get better and more consistently be able to get out of depressive episodes, it became a liability because it still felt a lot better than everything else. And it was still a thing that I centered my life around. And I realize now those other things that didn't make me feel good, it wasn't because I didn't like them or didn't care about them. That's how I interpreted it at the time. Like, oh, I guess I don't care about anything but video games. I was mentally ill and I was experiencing a mental health symptom that negated my ability to enjoy like time with my family and time in nature and things that I really love and value now. So when your life gets super focused on just the one thing, that may actually be a symptom of depression and anhedonia. And your inability to enjoy the other parts of your life might be a symptom. It might not be that you don't care about those things or that you've outgrown them. It might be that your brain is not functioning properly and that's why you feel the way you feel. So I hope this is helpful because these are not topics I see covered very often. Um, it's relatively easy to find like the official symptoms of depression, and they're important to know as well, but they often don't cover the full spectrum of what this actually feels like. And so I hope you were able to maybe gather some insight into how depression presents for you, or maybe know a little bit more about what to look for as warning signs that you might be heading into an episode. I'm sorry if I sound like crap today. I'm a little stuffy. It's been super hot here. I think a lot of stuff is blooming, and I have really bad seasonal allergies. So if I sound like there's something shoved up my nose, it's because my nasal passages are not open. All right. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.